Welcome to the Church of Mabus radio show. It's Friday night. We're all still alive. 17 p.m. Central. Haven't had any Putin nukes or no more calamities. Not yet, anyway. Well, we got Jay back with us tonight. He's back after kidney stone vacation.
Well, more than that, yeah. Diverticulitis and kidney stone, and been to the hospital 4 different times and stayed for 4 days. Yay! It was not a vacation of any sort.
Definitely not. And we got Jeffrey Shanks here with us tonight. Weird Archaeology from Atlantis to Ancient Aliens, The Return. How's it going? Good to have you here.
Oh, man, it's great to be back on. It's been a while. Pre-COVID, I think, since I've been on the show. It's great to be back.
And listening to, oh, man, hold on a second. I was supposed to play these little things, and I forgot. Hold on, let me find them. Where are they? Hold on a second. Okay, hold on. I got to play a couple little things real quick. I'm supposed to do it before the show, but I forgot. We're going to do it just real fast, and then we'll be right there. It's like a minute or something.
You are listening to UPRN, United Public Radio Network, coming to you live on 105.3 right up to 107.7 FM from the beautiful city of New Orleans. UPRNTalkRadio.com.
Looking for stories that are fresh and new? Dark fantasy, humor, space exploration, time travel, cyberpunk, alternate history, and more. They're in the L. Ron Hubbard Presents Writers of the Future anthology. From 24 award-winning authors and illustrators, plus art and writing tips and bonus stories. L. Ron Hubbard Presents Writers of the Future. Buy your copy at galaxypress.com, Amazon, or wherever books are sold.
Alrighty. I was supposed to start doing that recently, and it slipped my brain. Everything's slipping my brain lately. I've had some things lately. I've been watching that Secret of Skinwalker Ranch show a lot, and then for some reason we had an oven door blow up, which could have been natural. I don't know, but it's like a nice Frigidaire. Just happened. It was really strange.
Did you say oven door?
Yeah, like a glass oven door on a fancy Frigidaire oven, like the front of it. It just blew up. Why do you look like you're freezing? You still like you just got dematerialized in Star Trek or something. There you go.
Because you're freezing on my end, so
I don't know, but
so what? The glass exploded, or the whole door came on?
The door exploded.
That's weird.
And it's really strong. Like, I don't.
Oh.
Nobody knows how it happened. I mean, I've wondered if a dog tried to jump up and look on the stove, but even where it would have jumped would have been that like handle, so it would have been hard to. I don't know. It's just weird. But anyway, Michelle Disrocher says she removed 2 shadow beings from my house today and tweaked it, and that's what's interesting. Will Murray, who Jeffrey knows,
Yep.
He does a lot of clearing stuff too, and he has a connection to Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, and we got him scheduled coming up in the fall, so that's going to be a really good one. And it's, I believe people can do that. Sometimes it's a lot to comprehend for me, but I've noticed changes when she does it. And this dude worked, the government did it for them, and we have a whole history of and books about people doing it for the government, remote viewing. I mean, it's basically someone sitting in a room and psychically seeing faraway places. I get kind of likened to someone solving a murder for the police psychically, stuff like that. I believe there's something to it. Sometimes it's a lot for the brain to handle, but I've seen enough weird stuff. I don't rule anything out.
There are several well-documented
tweaked.
cases of psychics solving crimes. I believe it.
Yeah, I mean, remote viewing, like you said, the government did it for many years. They I believe
I think they're still doing it.
Yeah, they
don't think they stopped.
And I believe Will, was trained by one of the original guys, that was was on Project Stargate, the famous government program.
Like Ingo Swann or something like that.
Ingo Swann was involved in that. I think John Alexander, who you were mentioning earlier, Skinwalker Ranch was part of that back in the day. Hal Puthoff, whose name comes up quite a bit with, Bigelow and some of those folks, and he's involved, in some of the new UAP stuff. He goes back to that project back in the day as well. So, yeah, I like to, I'm kind of skeptical, but I always like to keep an open mind because the universe is a weird place, and we really don't understand all of it. So,
well, that's the main reason I'm here. If I didn't have weird stuff happen to me, I would not have thought about any of this stuff. My extent of knowledge of weird stuff, like was E.T. at the drive-in and Star Wars and stuff like from TVs and movies when I was a kid. And then, I had the cancer situation, testicular cancer, went through all that, lost one in the war, and then my dad died. I just think somehow all that suffering opened doors.
Yeah.
And then I also read a lot of occult stuff and paranormal. I think it seems like I can attract it to me. Like I can watch these paranormal shows like The Secret Skinwalker Ranch, and it seems like it can open things and things will start happening. And I've had that happen. I attract it somehow like that. I was just watching the Small Town Monsters Dogman Triangle. That's on Tubi for free if anybody wants to check it out. It was really good. Creepy. I don't know if I want to see one of those, but basically there was all these people, eyewitness testimony, seeing freaking werewolves in Texas, and there's a triangle of encounter points. And those creep me out. They seem like they'll just grab you and eat you. Well, a lot of people,
well, before the show, Jay and I were talking. For me, it was watching In Search Of as a kid in the late 70s, early 80s, man, with Leonard Nimoy. That warped my brain, but I was in all the way. UFOs, cryptozoology, paranormal, all of it. I've always been fascinated about it.
It's always great research. Yeah, they covered almost every subject. Yeah,
they hit them
alien
all.
Abductions, even. I'm sure they have them.
I got that box set.
Yeah, a lot of ancient astronaut stuff. We were talking about Von Daniken and Chariots of the Gods was very popular at that time. For me, the ancient mysteries too always had a special fascination, right? And of course, I ended up doing it for a living. I became a professional archaeologist. To be fair, it was in the 90s when, a lot of the stuff like with Graham Hancock was coming out, and John Anthony West and Robert Schoch with their ideas about the Sphinx being 10,000 years old, and all that stuff was happening in the 90s, right? And, kind of almost a snowball effect. I was getting into all this stuff. I finally decided, I'm going to go back to school and get a degree. When I found out you could just become an archaeologist, go to school and do that. And I did it. Today I'm, kind of skeptical about a lot of that stuff, and we can talk about that. But, to be fair, I owe my career, to the weird, wacky stuff, right? It was what inspired me to do it.
That's awesome. And, tell us some of the archaeological things that you've gotten into.
Sure.
Was Indiana Jones of influence?
Right. Well, first let me say, I do work for a federal agency, so I just want to, start with a disclaimer. Like anything I'm saying here, this is me as an individual, and I don't represent my agency or my employer, right? Because we're probably going to delve into some weird stuff, right? So disclaimer out of the way. Some idea. Well, you mentioned Indiana Jones, right? So. I just
should have brought my hat up.
Listen, I'm gonna throw this out there. The new Indy movie is good. Don't believe the naysayers. It's good. Go see this while it's still in the theater.
No spoilers. I know I'm gonna like it, but no spoilers. I haven't seen it yet.
No spoilers. But
I got the hat and I got the bullets, but I don't have everything.
I love
else.
Mads Mikkelsen. I like Harrison Ford.
Mads Mikkelsen is great. It's absolutely good, entertaining film. If nothing else, it's a great palate cleanser after Crystal Skull. If nothing else, it's a great way to end the series. There you go. Nice.
That's part of my Indian. This is an actual Shivalingam stone from India, but it's not
oh, that's cool.
The Shankar stone was fictional stuff, but it has the 3 lines on it.
Nice. Very cool.
I try to look at reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, but I don't trust them all the time. And lately, I see a trend where things that are actually decent.
It's a propaganda sheet.
My friend Mike Hacker said the Flash movie was really good. He enjoyed it. I haven't seen it yet, but that's by the guy that did It and Mama. That's a good director, so I want to see it. But even though the actor creeps me out, that he grooms kids or whatever. That's true. That's creepy, trying to choke a lady to death. It's hard to watch a movie when you have those parallels, but
it's tough.
I want to see it. But I've noticed a trend.
I'll be right back. I'm gonna go grab something.
A lot of these critics are probably paid off for something too.
I think a lot of it with Indy was also political. It kind of got review bombed by folks that felt like they were, because it had the strong female lead. I think there was people were saying, oh, the female lead's going to take the place of Indy and all of that. And so I think
so crazy.
I think some of it was kind of a reaction to that, and that isn't the case.
I'll murder you for this. I'm gonna kill you.
Right. So it got review bombed over something that's not even real, right? I mean, it's just ridiculous. So it was kind of the John Carter effect, right? I don't know if you remember, the John Carter movie where it's not a bad movie,
a good movie.
But the narrative before it even came out was, oh, this is going to be a flop, and so it became self-fulfilling. And I think that's kind of what happened with Indiana Jones. Unfortunately, it's a shame.
It's is it cancel culture pretty much? I mean, I understand some of that stuff, but sometimes it seems a little too much. Like it can go overboard.
I think this one was definitely unfair, and it's a shame. So people should go see it, especially if you're a fan of the original movies. It's a nice way to end a classic franchise.
Hey man, did you know are there any drive-ins where you're at? There's one in Alabama right across the line that's not.
I just heard that. Oh wait, maybe it was watching that Joe Lansdale episode where. Yeah. Was that where it was? You guys were talking about the drive-in.
Yeah. It's awesome. I don't know if there's any more. There might be, but it was an experience. I love it.
I'm kind of surprised more of them didn't pop up during COVID. You would have thought that would have been, kind of a thing to do.
Walmart or something. They didn't do no Walmart around here, or had drive-ins at Walmart. I heard something like that. Right. I would like to go back there. It was kind of a very nice, I don't know the name of it right now, but it's right across the Alabama line. But really nice.
Somewhere? Or?
Yeah, a little past that. We're about 30 minutes from Graceville, where I'm at. Right. But really well taken care of, but kind of far out in the woods to where you're like, this will make a good horror movie situation where House of 1,000 Corpses comes to get you at the drive-in. Right. But other than that, good food too. Onion rings, hamburgers. Nice. I want to go back.
Yeah.
But so what are some of the archaeological things that you've gotten into?
Well, God, all right. Well, God, I've been an archaeologist for almost 25 years now.
Cool.
So yeah, it's been a while.
Some of the tops.
One of the coolest projects I ever did. I worked in Ukraine back in, I think it was 2004, I guess it was, which is kind of interesting now with the war going on over there. That's given me kind of a really interesting perspective. Because I lived over there for a while in the early 2000s when it was, within a decade of the collapse of the Soviet Union and all of that, and country sort of just recovering from that. And that was an interesting experience. We were excavating Scythian tomb mounds out on the steppes in Ukraine. That was a pretty incredible experience, and there were warrior burials that we found, and a number of things. And it's an incredible experience. Just living out on the steppes in a village with. We had some of the guys that were the local just diggers that were working with us, and they were ex-Soviet military, and so we would just hang out. And my God, we drank so much. I drank so much vodka. We're living in this little village. You go in the little store in the village. There's just nothing there but vodka, cigarettes, and maybe cheese. Right?
Levi's pants if you're lucky.
Right? And so we just drank all the time. It was shots, and it was you're out there on the steps. It's kind of cool because the Scythians are related to the historical Sumerians, right? And Jeffrey knows I'm a big Conan the Barbarian guy, right? I do a lot of pop culture stuff on Conan and Robert E. Howard, and I work with the current rights owners and stuff. So it was kind of cool. I like to tell people we were doing Sumerian archaeology out there for a while. So that was kind of fun. But crazy stories. Especially some of the old guys who are ex-Soviet military guys or telling stories about being stationed in East Berlin back during the Cold War, and sneaking across the wall to hear Zeppelin play in West Berlin, and then sneaking back, stuff like that. That was a pretty cool experience. I think that was one of my favorites.
How long were you there?
Oh, I was there for summer, so probably 3-4 months, something like that. Worked in
Did,
Italy for a few years on
did you
Roman
see a lot
sites.
of Nazis, or is that just bunk?
No Nazis,
What
but
about space arcs? That's what I hear too. Is from those it's like this exopolitics right wing weirdness that Putin's after space arcs buried in
is
Ukraine.
that the
Whatever
new
the hell
thing?
a space arc is,
The
I'm not
closest
sure.
we did find some Nazi stuff actually, which is kind of funny, right?
Oh,
This
bomb
was
the whole place!
right.
Drop a nuke on it.
We did well because, and it's kind of weird, right? We're out there on the steppes, right? So it's just miles of wheat field as far as you can see. But every now and then there'll be these mounds, right? And they're these old burial mounds for Scythians, who were like the kind of steppe barbarians, horse barbarians, of ancient times. And because they're the only high ground for miles and miles during World War II, everyone, basically what they were trying to do was capture these ancient burial mounds. And once they would capture them, they'd turn them into machine gun nests and put guns on them and anti-aircraft guns and stuff. And so we're digging these things, and all of a sudden we're finding like unexploded ordnance and stuff, and it's actually a little
Nice.
sketchy, right? So that was interesting. But
Did you ever see Sisu, that movie?
no.
You know what I'm talking about?
No, what's that?
Remember this, SISU, or write it
Okay.
down when you can. Or remember SI.
Sisu.
I'll send you a trailer at some point.
Yeah.
It's a movie by the guy that did an old, I think they're Finland or Swedish or something, but he did a movie called Rare Exports. It's like a weird Santa Claus horror movie.
Right.
But it's a new movie that just came out, and it was at theaters and stuff. And it's about this dude during World War II, I guess, and he's just killing the crap out of Nazis. It's the most awesome thing since like Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. It was just crazy. Like it's just nonstop insane. But it's called SISU. It's
I'll
pretty
check it out.
A lot of people talked about it. Like it got really good reviews. So.
Yeah, I'll check it out. But
Yeah, definitely.
yeah, a lot of the work I do today, though, I do a lot of work in the Southeast United States. A lot of it in Florida. So while I don't have a whole lot of Nazis, I do get tons of snakes.
What's going on in Florida? What are you finding down here?
So some of the work. You see me? Did you lose me?
Yeah, well, something went out, but we can still see you.
Little color weird change and some freezing, but you seem okay. I don't know what the color change is, the light.
Weird. Okay. So a lot of the work that I do, I do work for a federal agency, and but the work I do is helping out other agencies. And I've been working in a national forest on a site. It's a pretty absolutely fascinating site. It was a British fort in Spanish Florida during the War of 1812, and it was it's in the Apalachicola National Forest. Jeff, you know where that is, not too far from where you're at, on the Apalachicola River. And there was the British came and set up a fort during the war, right? The British were fighting the United States, War of 1812, right? Battle of New Orleans, right? The Johnny Horton song, all that. And when they were here, the British put out a proclamation that anyone who could escape from enslavement and came and joined the British would get British citizenship, and they would be emancipated, and they could fight against the Americans. And so tons of people, escaped from, slavery in Georgia and the Carolinas and came into Florida and joined the British and became trained as British colonial Marines. And it was all took place at this site, this fort on the Apalachicola River. And so we've been doing a lot of the work there, mostly ground penetrating radar. We're not doing any excavations there. It's a very sensitive site. But trying to recover that story. And when the British left, they left it in the hands of some of the folks that stayed behind. And so you had one of the largest free African-American communities in North America at the time here, not just free, but free with a British-built fort with cannons, guns, supplies, and it was a destination for people to escape to. And it lasted for about a year and a half or so until Andrew Jackson and the Americans, Andrew Jackson ordered an invasion, another illegal invasion of Florida, and attacked the fort. And they had a battle and ended up a heated cannonball hit the powder magazine and the fort blew up and it killed almost everyone. So it's also kind of a tragic story as well. And but a lot of the survivors went on to become what became known as the Black Seminoles. They joined with the indigenous populations in Florida and continued to fight for freedom for decades after that. And it's an incredible story that almost no one knows about. And so that's what we're trying to do is we'll cover that story and tell it.
So you're digging there a lot?
We're not digging. We're not digging.
Digging with radar.
We're using ground penetrating radar right now. One of the reasons is because so many people died there. It's a very it's a very sensitive site, right? We don't want
that Dozier school that's in Mariana.
I do. I know it very well, and I know the story there very well. And I know some of the folks that work there.
I drove through there. They're doing something new to it, and we got in. Me and Christina and drove around. It's creepy there.
Yeah, that's a weird story there. Yes, I know that very well.
You been there, or you just know the story?
I've been both. I've been there, and I know some of the folks that work there.
Were you doing archaeological stuff there? Were you doing archaeology stuff there?
I wasn't. No. I wasn't.
Retrieving bodies with sonar?
Some of my colleagues did do some of the work there. Yeah.
That's some Stephen King shiznizm right there going on.
That's some dark stuff, right? Yeah. There's some dark stuff in Florida. People don't know, man. There's I
got a weird story. An uncle of Christina's, he passed.
Yeah.
He worked at that place. Dozier. He was kind of a little creepy. I ain't gonna say his name, but I hung out with him a lot. Like, he would drive by on his golf cart and tell me crazy stories from Vietnam and weird stuff. One of those situations. Right. But he claimed there was a UFO in Silver Lake, and that's in Mariana. And he was dead serious. I was like, I tried to get it to raise out. Like, yo,
I got a snorkel, man. Let's go look for it. What are we waiting for?
He was serious, too. It's one of those situations you're like, okay, already.
I mean, listen.
You never know. Maybe they went down in it, got water or passed
through it. My sister in the late 90s, she saw a classic black triangle just, south of, down in Wakulla County, south, going down towards Apalachicola, I mean, so we've got Eglin nearby. We've got Tyndall Air Force Base nearby. There's some.
Florida's seen a lot of activity. There was that guy in the 80s. I forget his name, but he took all those wonderful Polaroids that people said, "Oh, they're fake," but they're Polaroids. They're like instantly it develops right there. So it spits out
are you talking about the Gulf Breeze stuff?
Yeah.
No,
I forget the guy's name, but yeah, Gulf Breeze is the place.
There's some controversy to some of that.
Yeah, no, dude,
there was. Bruce Maccabee looked at almost every one of his original photographs, and he's like, "There's no way this is fake."
There's some that were, but some that probably may not have been. But there's a museum there. I don't know if it's still. Is it closed or is that still open?
No, it's probably still there.
I grew up in Pensacola, so I was there when that broke locally.
Okay.
And it was a huge deal. That was like 88, something like that, right?
Yeah, mid to late 80s, absolutely, yeah.
And they ended up finding the model in the guy's attic after he moved out of his house, and that kind of killed it. But I'll tell you, people I knew, like friends, family, everybody would go out looking for UFOs over Pensacola Bay. I mean, it was a huge thing for years, and in the late 80s, going into the early 90s, I mean, it became a pastime for everybody, and people saw weird stuff all the time. Mm-hmm. But again, you got Naval Air Station there, you got, Hurlbut Field, you've got all the military stuff going on there too, so, who knows, right?
Could have been a smorgasbord. Could have been
right?
Some fake, some real, some military, throw a drone in, throw some top secret in.
Right. Yeah, I mean, if you're flying around in a UFO in a space machine, you're like 2 seconds away from Cape Canaveral, so you can be hovering around, Pensacola, and then when there's a launch, zip over 2 seconds, and you're watching something shoot off to the moon.
Well, and listen, we've got that whatever technology is out there publicly now, the stuff that we have is 20 or 30 years ahead of it. Right?
Oh, more than that. They're more,
right?
100, 150 years ahead. They got stuff that's so good over there.
Yeah, and so we don't know what's out there, and I got to say, some of the new, I've been following this stuff for many years, right, my whole life, the UFO thing, all these things, and the Gulf Breeze thing really brought it home. That was in my backyard.
Yeah, but, I mean, it really put UFOs on the map, really, for the 80s and 90s.
It did, and I studied the history of the phenomenon going back to the early days. That's something that I'm a historian, right, so I studied the history of the paranormal too, right? And And I got to say, some of the new stuff, for a long time, I had gotten to the point where, you know what, man, it probably really is just our stuff, because we do know that the military was out there using the UFO thing as cover intentionally, right?
Oh,
You
man.
guys know about Doty back in the 80s, right? And some of that
Yeah.
stuff. So it becomes hard. Like, how do you know what's real, what's not? Is it just a psyop
Yeah.
and they're using this stuff as cover for things, right?
Yeah.
But what's going on
It makes
now?
perfect sense. It's a built-in story, and half the population believes it. The other half thinks everyone's
And there's
nuts.
probably
So-
misinformation campaigns by some of these government entities as well.
You're almost guaranteed that there are, right? Because we know in the past they've done it. We know that for a fact now. But things are kind of interesting now ever since 2017, and the new stuff coming out. This feels different. The things that's happened, the stuff that's been happening in the last 5 or 6 years, and we got congressional hearings about to take place, and all of this. It's really, and I've been following it very closely, and I don't know. I'm withholding judgment, because I think this is I don't know. It's intriguing, right? Because you're getting seemingly very credible people coming out and saying, no, some of this is real, right? And I don't know how much you guys watched the latest whistleblower. David Grush, the guy that's come out recently. Have y'all seen his interviews?
Yeah.
On that.
No, I haven't heard of that guy yet. No,
Oh, you haven't?
no, not yet.
A big whistleblower, like in front of Congress, a UFO retrieval program for the government.
Yeah, he's going to be testifying before Congress next week.
Oh, cool.
And
What's his name again? So remember,
David Grush, Gruscha.
name's been coming up a lot. And
Yeah.
Write that
one
down.
thing that sums this up for me, and why I don't try to buy all of it Skinwalker Ranch. I think there's real phenomenon there, but I try to use discernment and not be like a cheesehead with it all.
Right.
Because but when that Colonel John Alexander guy came there and he goes, listen, you're not in control here. It's in control here. I think that sums up all this phenomenon completely. It gave me chills saying that. There's something really in charge here that's really in charge, and it's been here longer than us. And there's some creepiness to it. That's all I know.
You guys remember the end of the Rush song 2112?
Right.
You remember what they say? Attention, all something planets of the Federation. We have assumed control.
Right.
Yeah, it happened.
It's it's a what's interesting too, the last few years, seeing a lot of this stuff come out, and like what's his face from Blink 182, all of this stuff, right? Lou Elizondo, and all of this stuff that's been coming out. People are talking about some of the folks that are claiming to know things, right? Or saying that there's this relationship between consciousness, and it's not just what what people have been saying, it's space aliens or whatever, right? It's more complex than that. People are starting to talk about the multidimensional or interdimensional idea now. These are ideas that have kind of been around for a while, right? Going back to
the multidimensional idea, and us from the future traveling back in the past to correct something that harms their future.
The time travel things.
Yeah, all three of those.
Be a popular one right now, right? So people are starting to, and I like this, right? Like getting away. I mean, because for many years we were locked into this sort of 1950s. It's got to be people. It's got to be creatures from outer space, right? From other planets.
Slimy lizards with lobster claws coming from other planets that eat our women, and
This is where talking about the concept of ancient aliens, right? And that you're getting this like it's something that's been around for a long time. People are saying this, right? So you watch things like the Ancient Alien Show and like Van Daniken we're talking about, and as an archaeologist, like I can tell you, like this stuff, they're taking things out of context, and this idea of like their ancient technologies in the past, and you can see evidence of it and how they're building monuments. They're thinking about this in the wrong way, right? Let's assume that this phenomenon is a real thing. Let's start with that assumption, right? And that we are interacting with non-human entities of some kind, right? And why would we expect that in the past, we can expect that they've been here for a while, right? That does make sense. Why would we expect that they would be doing things in the past that they aren't doing today, right? Why would we expect that these entities in the past would be doing things like helping build the pyramids and stuff like that? Are they today helping us build interstates and the Empire State Building and skyscrapers? No, right?
They overdo it.
They're interacting with us in very strange ways. people used to use the term abductions. Now experiencer is a more preferred term, right? But that's where, if you want to see this in human history, we should be looking for similar kinds of interactions that we have today, right? Jacques Vallée was one of the first to really look at this idea, right? Where he was, John Keel did it, a few years later, and even Carl Jung, a lot of people don't realize in the late 50s, he did a book on flying saucers, right? And was looking at these ideas to some degree that we may have been having similar kinds of interactions with these entities in the past, but we called them by different names, right? Fairies, angels, demon, jinn, succubi and incubi, right?
Mhm.
Like these, the hag that comes in the middle of the night and, sits on your chest, those kinds of things, right? There's similarities with the stories from mythology and folklore to the modern encounters that you started hearing about in the, really in the 60s with the hills, but really took off in the 70s and 80s, right? The so-called abduction phenomenon. And, especially the coming at night and, the similarities with things like sleep paralysis and these kinds of things. The connections with things of a sexual nature and reproductive nature, right? You see that in things like fairy brides, right? And changeling babies and things in fairy folklore, right?
Mothers would warn their daughters not to get too close to toadstool rings in the forest.
Right. Toadstool rings. How is that different from crop circles, right? I mean, so you get these, and Jacques Vallée was one of the kind of pioneers that really brought this stuff out. With his book Passport to Magonia that came out in '69, was
it's a big one.
That's a big one, right? And there was a lot of pushback from the ufological community at the time on that, because the extraterrestrial hypothesis was the main, that was the main theory out there, the main hypothesis or model. And people recognized, oh yeah, there's similarities, but they were just encountering extraterrestrials back in the day, and they just called them fairies or demons or whatever. But it may be more complex than that, and Vallée was the one who started looking at some of the strangest encounters that didn't make any sense, right? I don't know. Are you familiar with the story? The guy's name was Singleton, I believe it was, in the late 50s, and he was a farmer that had, a almost traditional flying saucer land in his field, and little short humanoid creatures came out with a jug and they wanted water from him.
Yeah.
Right. And he gave him some water, and then they cooked some pancakes for him on a grill.
Yeah.
Gave him pancakes, right? And they were buckwheat pancakes, right? It's the weirdest thing. And so most people just dismissed it as, okay, that's absurd, right? We obviously can't take this guy seriously, right? Buckwheat pancakes from space aliens, right?
Unleavened bread. It's a story from the Bible.
That's a story from the Bible. Jacques Vallée pointed out that the idea of buckwheat cakes is a common motif in fairy stories in Great Britain, right? That's the whole don't eat the fairy food, right? That kind of thing. So what the hell is this, right? That's weird, So he was the first one to say, hey, we can't just throw out these really weird stories. If anything, this should be telling us that whatever this is that humans are experiencing, where they're having these experiences and trying to understand them in ways that our mind can process them. He went to
Skinwalker Ranch, Jacques Vallée.
Yes.
I want to know that, but I don't know if we ever will. I'm hoping he shows up in an episode. I hope.
Yeah, I mean, he's still out there today. He's in his 80s now, but he's, he is the grand patriarch of ufology, right? He's one of our last living connections to the Project Blue Book era. He was a colleague of J. Allen Hynek, and partially responsible for Hynek, changing his mind on the phenomenon. When he, by the 70s, in his later years, Hynek, who had literally been the guy that, Project Blue Book, the Air Force hired to be the debunker.
He was staunchly against the idea until something flipped his brain. And
he was a swamp gas guy.
Completely went the other way.
And he finally came out and was like, no, I can't do this anymore. And it was in the late 60s. And
I always heard a scientist from Close Encounters, Steven Spielberg, that was based on him. I heard that.
The French scientist in Close Encounters is based on Jacques Vallée.
Yeah,
that's what I always heard.
Yes, that's right. And so Valet is kind of our last living link to that early era. And he's out there doing stuff. He was on Rogan, of all places, a couple of years ago. That was kind of a weird, surreal moment.
I haven't seen
Um,
that. I have to watch that one.
it was, to be fair, he's getting up there, right? And and maybe not as sharp as he once was, but he's a pioneer, and especially a pioneer in the idea that we need to have a broader approach to thinking about whatever this phenomenon is. Whether you're a skeptic or believer or whatever, or somewhere in between, there is something going on here. Humans are having this experience, and it's an experience we've been having for hundreds and thousands of years that we don't fully understand. And whatever that is, we need to be. We can't just be thinking of, oh, it's aliens from outer space. Well, that's just our modern, not even modern, 20th century, science fiction take on it, right? Because it's something much more complex and interesting than that.
Hey man, did you see the documentary Witness of Another World?
No, tell me about that.
Look it up. It's about this guy. He's in South America, and he's having UFO experiences. It's kind of shamanic. It's in Argentina, and Jacques Vallée shows up to this dude's house, and he's like old fashioned dressed, like he looks like he's like the horse and like the coffee commercial, but that's how he dresses and stuff. But it's good. It made me cry. Look it up, see if you can find it.
Yeah, for sure. What is it called?
Witness of Another World.
Witness of Another World.
And it's got old Jacques. He's in it. He shows up. Up. It's a good one. You'll like it. It's really good.
I would. Yeah, probably. I mean, so I don't know. We're in kind of a new place and a new era, and trying to understand this phenomenon. For me, for someone who has kind of dedicated their life and career to looking at cultures from the past, I'm interested in. It's a shame that you got the ancient aliens kind of thing, because that's super hokey and just not. Because there may be some interesting things to find there, but I think we're going to find it, if it is there, in things like folklore and mythology and those kinds of stories. And it's never going to be something we can really test, probably, or have any real evidence from. It's always just going to be suggestive, probably, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be looking for it,
Exactly. And it's definitely heated up to a point to where it's on every news station. I mean, it's everywhere now. It's a concern, and people are scared, and people, excited or whatever. Most people just don't even pay attention to it really at all. But
most people don't pay attention. Yeah.
They don't care. They don't want to talk about it.
Well, and you can kind of understand that, right? It's like the Matrix. Plug me back in so I can taste that juicy steak. I don't know the difference if it's fake or not. Just plug me back in, right?
Enjoy the simulation.
And that's not even an unrelated metaphor, maybe, right? I mean, because that's kind of what may be going on here. Is it goes back to the idea that the modern idea that, hey, we're living in a simulation, right? That comes from the Matrix. That goes back to an idea in kind of a fringe idea in quantum physics, the idea of a holographic universe. The idea that it kind of goes back to the double slit experiment in quantum physics, if you're familiar with that, right? An experiment that's been around for 100 years, right? Where if you fire a photon, through a two slits, if it's observed, did we lose Jay?
No. He'll be back very well.
If so, basically what it comes down to, and you can Google it and see, but there's this experiment in quantum physics that shows that subatomic particles, when they're observed, they behave like matter, what we think of as solid matter. When they're not observed, they behave like a wave, just energy, right? And so what that suggests is that there's a link between consciousness and what we think of as objective reality and matter, right? And that's maybe what's going on here, like what we think of as objective reality, like this solid laptop. It's really just we're creating this hologram in our brains. We're just interpreting these waves of energy, right, as matter. And that may be similar to what's going on with whatever the phenomenon is, right? People are encountering some sort of entity or consciousness or something like that, and their brains are translating that into a way that they can understand, right? And that's maybe what's going on. In the past, it might have been fairies or angels and demons or jinn or whatever. In the 1950s, 60s, it's aliens, right? Because that's what's in popular culture. That's what we can understand.
But it sounds like when you're talking about the Heisenberg principle, that the Heisenberg uncertainty principle has to come into play, like you said with the those particles. When we observe them, they change. When we don't observe them, they change.
That's right.
So the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, I believe, goes to the fact that anything that you study, ultimately you change. So if we're in part of a matrix and we have to study this hard cup to actually grasp it and fill it with water and drink from it. So doesn't that mean we're also altering our own reality? So
it does. We are
Nietzsche.
And that is the natural progression of that line of thought, right? And Heisenberg himself wrote a book on quantum physics and philosophy, right? That he was one of the few that tried to think about what are the implications of this stuff, right? That we're doing, and if that's the case, that we're really sort of creating our reality, as we're going along, then almost nothing is off the table, right? And so that's why it's hard to to be skeptical about anything, really, right? What are we doing? Are we manifesting our reality all the time, like many philosophies say? Maybe we are. And if there's other entities out there that exist at what we might call different dimensions or things like that, how would we interpret those in our reality? Are we part of them? Are we linked? Are we co-creating? Are we even we talked earlier, Jeff, you were talking about the new term UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon, instead of the old UFO term. And I was kind of joking. Yeah, it's almost like trying to make a more respectable term, like it's a graphic novel, not a comic book.
Trying to change the vernacular, yeah.
But it also makes sense in a way, because it's getting away from the idea of these things people are seeing in the skies. Maybe they're not vehicles or ships, right? Maybe it's just higher dimensional entities that we're only experiencing the part of them that we're able to, right? And with our limited senses, Are you guys familiar with the book Flatland by Edward Abbott? Came out in the 1880s. It was when people were starting to think about what would a fourth dimension be like, right? Instead of our three spatial dimensions. He wrote a book called Flatland that was kind of an intellectual exercise to try and understand what that might be like. And Flatland is this two-dimensional world, right? So people are living almost like on a sheet of paper, right? People are living on this flat sheet of paper, and so let's say you had a circle drawn on that flat piece of paper. Somebody living there in Flatland, looking at that circle, living there in two dimensions, would just see that as a line, right? But us, in our three dimensions, we can look down and we can see that circle, and we can see the flat guy outside of the circle that's drawn on the page too. We can take our finger and we can stick it into the circle. We can see inside of it. He can't even see inside the circle. It's just a line to him, right? If we stuck our finger through Flatland, right, he would just see this slice of flesh, like two-dimensional slice, as it moved and changed shape, as it moves through, right? He's only seeing part of it. That may be what, some of this phenomenon is. It's us in our limited three spatial dimensions and a fourth temporal dimension seeing higher dimensional phenomena or entities, and we're only seeing part of
currently science. But doesn't science tell us as our dimensions? We have the three, and I don't remember what they were all called, but it's length, width, depth, and what have you.
Right.
And then a fourth dimension, the fourth one being time, because we are moving through time and space. We're not always in the same place in the universe, galaxy.
That's right.
That's our fourth dimension, is movement.
That's right. And so if you have entities that are existing in dimensions beyond time too, then even time is something that we experience linear time. They may not be, right? They may be experiencing this in all different time. This is where the idea of maybe they're time travelers. Maybe they're us from the future coming back, right?
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe we've gotten to a point where
that weird dude from Men in Black 3 who's in all time zones at once.
Exactly, right?
Have you seen Men
That
in
may
Black
be
3?
part-
Yeah, the one dude, he's like he can touch all
Yes.
time zones. He's
Right.
weird.
Yeah. And so, all of these things are maybe possible. We don't really know. And, it's fascinating to try and think about it in these kinds of terms, right? That's why I love, people that you still see, skeptics in their bunkers. Well, they couldn't travel here faster than the speed of light. But I mean, we're so far beyond that now, right? I mean, that's not even, it's,
Hmm.
trying to understand what this is, what's happening.
Yeah, with quantum physics, we only have just barely begun to scratch. We
Right.
have no idea
Yeah.
what could be possible with other types of thoughts, other
Yeah.
mechanics, other physics. You know, there could be substances out there that if you touch it, it teleports to the other side of the galaxy without any kind of
Right.
energy. You just boom, you're there. We don't know.
Yeah.
The
And so
possibilities are
for
endless.
me, like I say, I mean, I'm fairly skeptical in that I don't necessarily believe in anything, right? Because what does believing mean, right? But I'm open to almost anything, right? I mean, there are these people experience weird things all the time, and we don't fully understand the way the universe works. So, who am I
Mhm.
to say that something can't be, right?
Yeah, I'm with you on
Also,
that all the
that's no
time. People
fun.
ask me all the time, do I believe in aliens? I'm agree with you. I don't think the word belief works in this subject matter. Someone asked me if I
Right.
believe in aliens. I say no, I don't believe in aliens. That infers that there's some sort of religious connotation, or that maybe
Right.
there's some sort of reverence going on. And then also, even though I believe in them, maybe there's also the possibility that if science discovers they don't exist, then now I cannot believe in them. And
Right.
I'm like, no, I don't. That doesn't work. That
Well,
word does not apply here. What I can tell you is that they do exist, and it is mathematically impossible that they do not exist.
right.
So they're here. They're
Right.
here to stay. There's no way to get rid of them. They may or may not be on our planet yet, but there are the entire universe, the entire galaxy. Number one is replete with living organisms. Number one. Number two,
Right.
extend it out to the universe. We're not alone. It's mathematically impossible we're alone.
Or alternatively, they've always been
Yeah.
here,
Yeah. There's
and
that
Betty
too.
and, Betty and Barney. Betty, when you see these scientists like Neil Tyson and stuff, like I like that guy, but he says stuff like there's no way they're
Right.
here or whatever. You have people that I've interviewed, and even myself, who have been through experiences and
Right.
have PTSD from it.
Yeah.
I mean, Betty and Barney Hill, that's one of the most famous cases ever,
Yep.
and there's pretty good evidence. So it's like a slap in the face when you see these little.
Yeah,
little
I know a
things.
lot.
They were studied. They were studied by two of Harvard's best psychoanalysts.
Yeah, John Mack. Right.
John Mack
Yeah.
being the second one who
Right.
took over when his predecessor
Right.
left the office. And he did how long of a study? 25, 35, 40-year long study?
Many years. Yeah.
With
Decades.
with thousands of people. And
Yep.
his final conclusions are it happens.
Yeah.
He-
Something is going on here,
Yeah.
right?
The phenomenon is real. He can verify you that.
And I'm not an experiencer myself, Jeffrey, I know you are, and I know other people that are, people that are truly sincere, and there's no way I could ever deny that they experienced something. They did,
Mhm.
what that is. We may not fully understand it,
It's unfortunate
it's
for
a
subjective
real
interpretation. So
I have no doubt that it's a real phenomenon of
Mhm.
some kind, and that's Mac, his career. I mean, he was he took a beating for it, right?
Yeah.
And
But even against his peers, when he was reviewed with most of his papers, they couldn't find a flaw in any of
They
his
couldn't.
research. So
Nope.
he was redeemed all the time.
but it was tough on him, and
Oh yeah.
and it's that's unscientific in my opinion, right? You've got to
I agree.
that's not what science is about. That's dogmatic, right? To be able to, and this is what Avi Loeb is going through right now. He's getting a lot of grief as well, and all he's saying is, "Hey, look, why would we not at least explore this idea, right? Why does there need to be a stigma? If there's something there, cool. If not, cool. Let's study it. Why
Let's
is
find
it
out for sure.
why is it taboo to even study this? That's not how the scientific method is supposed to work. I will say this: the scientific method itself, it's a wonderful tool, but remember, science is just a methodology. And it's a methodology that has a number of parameters that are necessary for it to be applicable, right? You've got to have a hypothesis that's falsifiable. You've got to be able, to experiment and repeat those experiments. And, a lot of phenomenon that just doesn't apply. And so the scientific method just is not a useful tool for trying to understand it. And so, but just because the scientific method may not be applicable to something that isn't observable, repeatable, testable, doesn't mean that whatever that phenomenon is doesn't exist. It just means that you've got to find other tools to try and understand it.
Or the methods of verifying, with whether it's ghosts and goblins or
Right.
hauntings and that kind of thing, or UFOs and aliens. There's enough testimony, eyewitness testimony and whistleblower testimony, that if you were to take the bulk of these testimonials and people that have like actually sworn to their testimonies and had them notarized and publicly authenticated, I guess you can call it, you could get a conviction in any court in the United States of America with this information. I'm sorry, but you could.
And all of those things that you just talked about, again, may all be different expressions of the same phenomenon, and that's what may be happening. That may be what's going on. All of these things that we label as paranormal or UFOs, even cryptids, perhaps, right? May all be expressions of whatever this phenomenon is. And that's our limited 3 or 4th dimensional brains, attempting to understand information that is beyond, what our senses and what our mind can really process. And so we have to find ways to interpret that. They may all be different expressions of the same thing. And that's where a lot of people that are looking at some of this stuff now are maybe starting to come to that conclusion. And, people, like Diana Paluska, her book, American Cosmic, which I would highly recommend, looks at this idea to some degree. She's heavily influenced by Jacques Vallée as well, right? I mean, a lot of this goes back to such a pioneer. And, some of the people that are out there really, really thinking about this is kind of where they're going with it. That there's this link between, consciousness and the phenomenon that we don't fully understand yet. And, it's more than just little green men from outer space, perhaps, right? It's much weirder than that.
It's a lot broader than people. I mean, it would probably shock people to inactivity if they were to know the real scope of it,
right? And
that's probably part of the reason why they're trying to keep it all secret, but that's not the only reason. But that's it.
Yeah, and
it's scary to a lot of people. I think the people who would be least frightened and least incapacitated by all this coming out all at once would be the very, very native people who no electricity, live in loincloths, have a shaman as the troop leader. They were probably like, oh yeah, we knew all the time. They could care less.
Yes. Well, I mean, you kind of get that already, right?
Yeah.
A lot of indigenous folks are kind of saying the same things, and it's we're catching up in a lot of ways to things that many ancient peoples may have already known, or at least understood in their own way, right? So I don't know. It's kind of it's a fun idea to think about. But also a little scary, right? Because some people have very negative experiences. I mean, Jeffrey, it sounds like your experience, I mean, it wasn't entirely a positive one, right? I mean,
I've been a little bit of everything. I mean, a lot of it. I interviewed Travis Walton, Fire in the Sky,
right?
And I asked him about fear, and the whole thing was with him, Thomas Reed, and him, who have both been through experiences. And Travis Walton said that if it were not for the fear, it would be a cakewalk. That's the hardest part of it. It's just that fear. When you see this stuff, it's really scary.
Right.
And I've had different ones where they've been exhilarating and, wonder and awe, to where one time I saw some beings at a lake that seemed reptilian-like and kind of like holograms. And I've been partying and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. It was when I was younger.
Right.
But my first initial reaction to them was fear and, oh my God, I'm seeing a fallen angel or the devil. And at the same time, they were like saying "I love you" and singing and saying weird positive things to me. So it was really weird.
That is
But
weird.
the closest thing that I've ever, it was like telepathic sort of, but the
Yep.
closest thing I've ever seen to them is like Mayan god glyphs and wood carvings and stuff. They were just really
Interesting.
weird, but it was like a astral. It's like they weren't physical. It was like
Right.
almost like the Jedi Force Ghost or something,
Right.
but different. Not blue, but kind of like a gray. It was weird. Definitely astral, another dimension. But yeah, that was kind of scary. But one of the biggest ones I've seen light beings a lot, and those are usually positive. And I think those may be the dead, or could be a ET, could be, angel ET, same thing. But I kind of think I lean towards us kind of like what we are as light beings as well. There's something to that.
Right.
I've seen those a lot. And we're like shamans say luminous beings of light. And, we have the aura and all that. And I really think that's kind of what we are on a lot of levels. Like there's something about Christianity saying you get a light body, and some of these other belief systems. Like I saw something about some Buddhist monks that died, and they claimed they did some kind of process so they could go to these bodies of light, and they left their bodies behind, and the bodies kind of acted weird and stayed, didn't get old or decay as fast, and had weird things happen. And there's something to that body of light. Oh, there was something I was going to say. We had Sunbow True Brother on, and he's had a lot of alien and Sasquatch experiences and been traveled to shamans and hung out with their, tribes all over the earth. And his name's Sunbow True Brother, and you can find his site. It's pretty fascinating. He's up in Quebec. But he said a lot of these aliens, and he's Bigfoot as well, they have different factions, and some of them have gone over to AI and are cyborg-like. And there's different factions, some that, have humanity's interest, or some that do not, that are like, the cyborg AI weird ones. And basically saying in these times that decisions we make can make you go like, AI rogue. It got pretty weird, but just there's a wide variety of these beings with different personalities like people,
Right.
There's a-holes in every crowd, but there's also, good ones. So
I mean, these are the kind of things that Jacques Vallée and John Keel, if you guys are familiar with John Keel, most people know him for Mothman Prophecies, right?
Yes.
But, he also wrote a book called Trojan Horse, in the early, like 72, I think, a couple of years after, Vallée did Passport to Magonia, but along similar lines, right? That there are these weird, anomalous encounters. People have these, just sometimes very bizarre encounters with people, and you can't just ignore the quote paranormal aspects of people's experiences, and there's just something just different about it. I mean, some of the things you're describing, right? These are not your textbook, grays, that are doing things like you're seeing. They're not even textbook reptilians, right? I mean, but you're experiencing these things and you're seeing these things that,
It reminds me of a few things that Stephen Hawking said. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the few things he said about aliens. And the one that got me first that he said was kind of intriguing. He said, if we find ourselves going out looking for intelligent alien life forms, we might encounter something that is so incredibly foreign, so alien, that we do not recognize it as life form.
Right.
And I thought, that's a unique perspective. But then he also further, like right before he died, he said another one where he's like, it's probably not a good idea for us to go venturing out into space looking for intelligent life. We might encounter some sort of AI that would be detrimental to us. Look at what happened to the Indians, or words to that effect. Yeah. So it's not a good idea if you've got sticks and fire to go out and go find the guy with ray beams and spaceships. It's not a good idea.
The first thought there that he comes up with is, in a lot of ways, it's the same premise as like H.P. Lovecraft's cosmic horror idea, right? It's the very
Malders and stuff like that,
very much, right? And it's not entirely unconnected. I think I've talked about this on the show somewhat. I do a lot of work with popular culture history and pulps in particular. Looking at especially speculative fiction pulps and Lovecraft and Howard and these guys, and they were all toying with some of these ideas of ancient aliens and things long before Von Daniken was. A lot of the stuff, and they in turn were borrowing ideas from Theosophy and Madame Blavatsky and Atlantis and Lemuria and all of these things that were starting to become popular in the late 1800s. And you get this, interesting, this, what the book I'm kind of working on right now is kind of a history of, the of you might call it weird archaeology, right? Like the title of this episode. Going back to the 1800s, and you get this weird intersection of occult thinking, early speculative fiction, and what you might call alternative archaeology, nonfiction, right? Where all of these ideas keep intersecting with each other, to the point where a lot of the things that we see in the modern day phenomenon, you can see these things appearing in popular culture and in pulp literature and early science fiction in the same way that you can see it in folklore and mythology in the centuries before that as well. It's I actually just picked up I collect books. I just got a first edition of a book called The Coming Race, right? Sometimes it's called Vril, The Coming Race, right? It was a novel by Edward Bulwer Lytton in 1870s, and it's an early kind of like Hollow Earth novel, right, with like this lost advanced race underground, and a guy discovers
it's a book Hitler read. I'm thinking
it ended up indirectly becoming very influential on Nazi philosophy decades later, unfortunately. But
Real and Thule Society, yeah.
Yes, it was via Madame Blavatsky and Theosophy, right? And it was fiction, right? But there's ideas in there that you see today, like some of the popular ideas on the phenomena is maybe this is not, maybe they're ultra terrestrials, right? Is a term that you'll see. It was actually John Keel that coined that. A lot of people are talking about the idea that they may be coming from the oceans and things like that. That seems to be a popular idea, even though that's been around for a long time.
That's in a lot of ancient cultures. There's the knowledge and aliens coming from the oceans.
Ocean.
You got the
right?
Dogon in Africa, and you got the Dogu in prehistorical Japan.
Yes.
12,500 BCE. A culture that, by the way, that started at 12,000, roughly 12,500 BCE, just after the Ice Age went away, and lasted till about 4,000 CE. That's a long time for a prehistoric society to make it.
We have these myths. We have early, science fiction and pop culture with people coming up with these ideas of lost races and advanced people that are living underground or living in the oceans, or these kinds of ideas. I mean, they're kind of out there percolating, right? And maybe Jung was onto something when he started touching on this, that they're archetypes, right? But why is it that these ideas keep coming back over and over again? Why do they have this appeal? One of the when the idea of ancient aliens really takes off, even before Von Daniken in the late 60s, is in the 40s and early 50s with something that was called the Shaver mystery, which a lot of people don't remember now, but it was a huge fad.
I've heard of those.
It began in the science fiction pulps and amazing stories, where there was this one guy that started writing in letters to the editor of Amazing Stories, this pulp fiction magazine, talking about how he had experiences with these subterranean beings like Deros and Teros, and they were descended from Atlanteans and Lemurians, and they've been living underground for thousands of years, and they manipulate our minds, right, and cause us to have fear, cause us to have some of these same ideas, right? And it seems pretty clear when you read this guy's writing that he has a lot of the hallmarks of what today we would recognize as types of mental illness, probably what would have been called schizophrenia or those kinds of things, because he was claiming he was hearing voices and this kind of stuff, right? But and the editor of Amazing Stories, a guy named Ray Palmer, started publishing this stuff, and he would tweak it a little bit and play with it, and it became a big fad. This Shaver was the name of the guy, right? And so it became called the Shaver mystery, and it had a big influence. There were these basically ancient alien races that have been here on Earth for hundreds of thousands of years, right? And living underground now, living in Mount Shasta, right? It brings in Mount Shasta, which is a popular thing. These ideas are kind of out there, and was he really suffering from mental illness, or was he just tapping into some kind of universal consciousness thing and
Yeah,
distorting
the
it in his
universal internet.
mind, right? Right? I mean, because again, if people are getting information that we can't really process, you interpret it in different ways. You try to your mind tries to make sense of things, right? I mean, and that was a very influential thing. That was in the 50s when you have the beginnings of sort of the modern New Age movement was starting to come into play in the 50s and 60s.
Have you heard of the story of Paul Benowitz? Does that
Yeah.
ring a bell? Greg
Yes.
Bishop and Project Beta.
Yes.
I've interviewed him a long time ago.
You interviewed Paul Benowitz?
Greg Bishop.
Oh, Greg Bishop. Okay.
Yeah, he wrote
That's
the
right.
book
Because
about all
Benowitz died
that.
in the 90s, right?
Yeah, that was a weird story where he was like seeing UFOs and stuff, but there was a
Right.
government agency involved, and there might have been some black ops stuff, but it got weird. I know he took his own life or something. It got really weird. Got really strange.
Well, he's the one that came up with the story of
Bye,
the
Jay.
Dolce base. The whole Dolce base came from Paul Benowitz, right?
Oh,
He's the one that claimed that he went down there and they were special forces fighting aliens, and they got in a gunfight, in the late 70s. Can you hear me? We lost Jay, I see.
yeah, I was checking something technical.
Yeah.
See if Jay, see, I don't know what happened to Jay.
Yeah,
Jay got taken.
See, we started talking about something we shouldn't be talking about. Maybe, yikes! I mean,
yeah, the Skinwalker Ranch energy's getting us now.
We start talking about Dolce Base and things get weird.
It ain't Jay. But
yeah, he did. He ended up supposedly committing suicide. Obviously, a lot of people thought it was suspicious, his death. Right, it was right out. He came out and told the whole, gave a whole big story at a UFO conference, '94, I think, right about that time. He strangled himself with a catheter tube or something.
Weird.
Yeah, it's
I had a lot of UFO stuff in Georgia, and at one point, the silent helicopter appeared over the house that made no noise, and a guy dressed in like Top Gun kind of stuff, like a jet or something. He goes, waved at us, and it shot off. And that whole time we were outside with friends looking at these UFOs in the sky. None of them ever came to me face to face, but that made me know that there was some kind of government agency involved. And then later at another house, I said something about turning my phone off, and someone put a $2,000 credit on my phone to keep it going, and it was no one I knew, and I think it had to do with them listening to the show. I turned that phone off, and the phone company sent me a check of it, and I spent it on land taxes and a shopping spree. But that's proof there are things that are monitor us about this stuff. I know it.
So that's one of the things about some of this modern disclosure that seems to be taking place now with some insiders starting to come out and these whistleblowers, and a lot of the major media aren't really picking up on it, even though they're about to have congressional hearings. There's still, and I don't even think it needs to be a conspiracy. It's more just because it's been a subject of ridicule for so long. People don't take it seriously, but they should, and here's why. Even because what's going on here is, let's say that none of this is true, right? There's no non-human entities, blah, 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 whatever. Then you've still got these government, intelligence people that are coming out telling all of these stories. So then that means they're doing some kind of psyop then. That should also be a story. Why do we have all these high-level former intelligence people coming out saying that all of this stuff is real? If they're doing it to cover up for something or do all of that, that should be a story too. In some ways, it may be a bigger story, right? If you've got this, conspiracy to create a fake idea of aliens and UFOs and stuff, that should also be a story. And it's not being taken seriously.
Some of those UFO cases that happen, the Phoenix Lights, and then there's Stevensville, Texas, where these big UFOs appear over cities and everybody goes crazy and the mayor comes out and with a dancing alien. I think some of that may be government psyop. I hear a lot of things like they can do things with lasers and reflections, and or it may just be real technology we have, and they're just seeing how people will react to it.
That's right. And what's going on now with this modern one, and I think this needs to be kept in mind, right, is we may be doing things with plasma to do like radar spoofing and stuff like that. And one of the things that seems to be going on with this modern disclosure thing that's happening, right, is that there seems to be a disconnect between the Air Force and the Navy. And they seem to be at odds with each other. It's mostly Navy pilots that are coming out talking about this stuff. Hey, this stuff's happening. They're buzzing us. This is, we're at risk, as pilots. And the Air Force is the ones that seem to be not cooperating at all. So I think we need to entertain the possibility that you may actually have two branches of the military here where the Air Force may be testing stuff on Navy pilots without their knowledge, and messing with them. That may be part of what's going on here, potentially, right? That's one thing we should, I think keep in mind. But there definitely be a disconnect between the Navy and the Air Force with this.
You ever hear the story of Fort Benning, Georgia, that happened there?
No, which one? I'm not familiar with
Look it up sometime. There's a book called East of Eden or something like that, but it's Fort Benning, Georgia. All the soldiers tripped out and saw aliens and UFO stuff. And I used to be, I guess he passed away and we're still friends, hopefully. But John Vasquez was there. There were soldiers crying for their mom and saw an alien. This all happened at a military base. It definitely sounds like a weird possible experiment. I've wondered if psychedelics,
like they ghost them or something, right?
Yeah. And let me tell you,
certainly wouldn't be the first time.
Psychedelics can open you to these type experiences. I've had experiences completely sober. I've had experiences partying my ass off.
Right, I'm with you, man. I went through my phase back in the '90s, especially. I had, I'll tell you, on acid one time. One of the strangest paranormal experiences I had was a buddy and I, a bunch of us were tripping. This back in the '90s, the old days, and we linked telepathically, and we both knew it, and the two of us are just laughing, right? Because we're the only. Everyone else is like, "What the hell's wrong with you two?" Because our minds were linked, and we were talking telepathically to each other. We were communicating telepathically, and it was real, and it lasted for several minutes, and that's one of those things that I've experienced. I have no idea how to explain it. It was very real, but yes, we were tripping, right? But not tripping so much that we didn't realize what was happening. It
opens your senses. Me and a friend were going down the road, and we were just a little short ways from my house, and he was driving when he shouldn't have, I'm sure, but it wasn't that far, and then we had just started doing it, and we got home a few minutes later. But anyway, there was a big angel on a cloud going like this. And we both saw it and stopped the car and saw it and was like, do you see that? Do you see that? It was like a big beam of light standing on a cloud like Highway to Heaven. And I've seen those completely sober. Maybe it was a flashback at the time, but I saw two leave my house at Silver Lake. Like they had been in the house, flew through the roof, and went straight to the heavens. When I was listening to the Bible on a TV, DVD, whatever, for some reason. But I can listen to the Bible and then listen to Norse stuff and go to shamanism. I'm all over the place.
Right.
But I saw these two big beams of light leave my house. I was completely sober, not even weed or nicotine or anything. But there's something to it, and
obviously, hallucinogens have been a part of many cultures for many years, right? I mean, there's a lot of people are into DMT and ayahuasca these days, right? And exploring those ideas. Yep. That's something I've never done. I haven't done hallucinogens in well over 20 years probably, but that's one thing I'd be interested in trying is ayahuasca. I'd like to.
Yeah, same here.
I'd
under the right conditions, absolutely.
Yeah, that's something I'd like
things late in the past few years, but it's been type stuff that's really short. That's the way I like it, because some of
Right.
that blood pressure issues.
I'm too old to be doing that tripping for 8 hours stuff.
Some of this
Dead
crap's
Show.
like
That was
8 hours,
back
and
in
you
the day.
think you're gonna die. I don't know if I can do that.
Right.
I'm almost
Yeah,
50.
I'm with you. I'm too old for that these days.
Don't worry. That's my DMT, and then there's some like
Right.
uncle of LSD or something that's
Yeah.
like only 15 minutes.
15
or 30
minutes.
Yeah, I like,
Hotels, I'm good, right?
I like that.
There's a less potent single thing to ayahuasca that it's on one of those islands near Palau and outside of Australia where they filmed Survivor, and they had the contestants drink this brew, and it's a mild hallucinogen, but it's basically the ingredients are basically a fermented fruit. I forget which kind of fruit, and grandma spit. Literally, the old women of the village take these over-ripened fruit, chew them up, and spit them into a vat. I mean, they literally and like they're hawking loogies into this big vat, and then they boil it up and give it to the men, and the men get just verschnickered like you wouldn't believe. I mean, they are lost drunk.
Right.
It's really powerful, but I don't think it's as strong as ayahuasca. However, it is. Most of the contestants threw up after drinking it.
Interesting. Well, yeah. I mean, I went through my psychonaut phase. Like we all do in college, right? And,
well,
all this
college
weird
is where it really began,
right?
but
mine was
the seeds were sown when my cousin and I, at the age of 16, went to the beer drive-through, bought cigarettes and 3 cases of beer and some other things, and went driving through western Pennsylvania and eastern Ohio. That was a fun trip. But
careful, they have Mothman.
Everyone says, the gateway drug is marijuana, and I say bull honkery. It's cigarettes, it's tobacco. Because if I didn't smoke cigarettes first, I would have never tried weed, and I would have never tried cocaine. I would have never tried all these multi-other chemicals I tried.
Yep, you're so right. It was getting that first pack of smokes out of that cigarette machine when I was 14.
You're done. And it was Marlboro Reds that we smoked. My cousin was already smoking. He was like 15 and a half. And he's a little bit younger than me, but I was 16. It was my first car trip. So I took my parents' 1976 Pontiac Le Mans from Rockville, Maryland to Youngstown, Ohio, a 7-hour trip. Right. And I asked my dad, I said, hey, Dad, I don't want you to write directions. Just give me the key roads. What am I getting on? I know I'm going 270 to 70, Pennsylvania Turnpike. Then where do I go from there? And he just told me certain roads, how just to get into the city of Youngstown. Once I hit Youngstown, I was like, oh, I turn here. Boom. There's my family's trucking depot. I turn here. Boom. And then a couple more roads, and I was at my grandparents' house in lickety split, no time at all. So it was a fun trip. But the things we did is that one trip, that's when I started smoking cigarettes at the age of 16. And downhill from there.
Well, I did my psychedelic phase, but then I did at that point start looking into different types of meditations and stuff. This is probably late 90s, trying to do it naturally, right? Because that's kind of the idea. It's the same idea, right? It's expanding your consciousness and trying to tap into whatever this is, right? This,
making new connections in the brain, making new pathways work.
I ended up, for me, and I tried different paths, Western, esotericism and hermeticism and things like that, and Eastern traditions like Buddhism and transcendental meditation. I ended up Kriya Yoga ended up sort of becoming the thing for me, which I don't know if you ever heard of Yogananda, right? Autobiography of a Yogi is a famous book. That's
I know the word Naga refers to the snake people, right? But I don't know the book.
Right.
Did you say Naga? What was the title?
Yoga Naga?
Yogananda.
Yogananda. I'm sorry, I heard something cool. Yeah, I have heard of Yogananda. I've heard of that book. Yes.
Yeah. So, and started doing that for a while, and there's a lot to this. I mean, these experiences and these things. There's real. There is something real going on here. Beyond what we think of as our 3 or 4 dimensional reality, and and all of these things are kind of related. And it's funny to see people. I was listening to a podcast the other day that I enjoy quite a bit. It's called the UFO Rabbit Hole, and by Kelly Chase is who does it.
It is certainly that, yeah.
Yeah, she's younger, and she got into this in 2017, right when all of this stuff came out, and it's fun to hear a younger person. She's like slowly discovering all of these things that a lot of us that have been doing this for a long time, like looking at consciousness and looking at all these things, we're doing back in the day, and people are independently rediscovering the same things, and all of these things are sort of related, and they're and it's fascinating to see. I hang out on Reddit a lot, which skews very much younger, it is fun to see a lot of the younglings just discovering some of this stuff for the first time. Stuff that us OG folks have been, into for many decades.
Can I open you in other ways? When I was in high school, that's probably 83, 84, Pink Floyd finally came out with their latest album,
Right.
Delicate Sound of Thunder, right?
Right.
And so me and my friend, who was a
Great
freshman, one
album.
of my best friends still, we were just enjoying the album. We actually went and saw the concert in JFK, but he heard one of his freshman co-students walking down the hall going, "Hey, there's this new band out called Pink Floyd," and he literally walked up to them and slapped them in the face and said, "Psh, they've been around since the 60s. He walked away from them. So you got to be careful. Sometimes something is so new they think it just came out, and it's like, sorry, this story happened
a lot of them do,
years
right?
ago. Yeah.
But you know what? I mean, but those are teaching moments too. Right?
Yeah, they can be a teaching moment, but
they can.
That struck me as funny that my friend.
They can be frustrating sometimes too.
So frustrating. He actually slapped another student because they thought Pink Floyd was brand new.
Like, really, what's your source for that? Where's the YouTube video to back that up? Like, YouTube video. I got books. I don't know what you know what.
Yeah. Back in my day, YouTube was called books.
Right. But it's cool, right? It's cool seeing younger folks kind of rediscovering this stuff for the first time, right? On the other hand, though, they're seeing all the what looks like disclosure. Oh my God, it's about to happen. We're gonna get the truth here. Like,
we're a lot closer than we have ever been, but I don't really. I'm not skeptical. I'm very skeptical about it. Seeing it in my lifetime.
Right. They all think it's
99. I have like one breath left being like, here's the story. I'm like, great. I'm going to hear the story, and I'm done. And then it's like, that's how it'll happen.
Sweet summer child. You don't know. We've been here so many times before.
Mm-hmm. You get encouraged, you get discouraged. It's an up and down. It's like manic depression,
Right?
It really is. Like, they're going to tell us. Oh crap! No, they're not.
Yeah. Well, one thing we need to address is Atlantis. It's in the title.
Yeah, let's talk about
some props. Do you think it's down here in the Florida area? I've heard it so many different damn things. I don't know where the hell it is.
So
Antarctica.
I don't. So Atlantis is something I've been fascinated with it as a concept. I think that again, this is kind of an archetype, right? This idea that we're missing something in our history, right? That we're missing, and I think it's in a lot of ways it's the same trope as this idea of maybe there is some kind of there's a lot of similarities between the Atlantis trope and archetype and the ancient astronaut, ancient aliens idea, this concept of something advanced in the past that we have lost, right? That's missing, and I think you see it in popular culture, which is kind of where what I was talking about earlier. We see this in beginning in the 1800s. The idea of Plato's Atlantis, this lost civilization, it kind of comes back into popular culture with Jules Verne with 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. It had kind of been forgotten for the most part until you get the scene in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea where the Nautilus goes by, Atlantis, and they see Roman columns under the ocean and all of that, right? And that inspired a guy named Ignatius Donnelly to write a book called Atlantis, the Antediluvian World in the early 80s, early 1880s. And that became a hugely popular book. And a lot of the modern ideas of Atlantis, the idea of this, advanced civilization in the past that was maybe in the Atlantic Ocean where Plato said it, and we can see evidence for it by saying, hey, there's pyramids on this side of the ocean and pyramids on that side of the ocean, so they must have come from this central idea. That all comes back from this book, by Ignatius Donnelly from 1882. And a lot of even what you see with Graham Hancock today, with his idea of this lost ancient advanced civilization, a lot of the stuff that he's talking about comes straight from Ignatius Donnelly, 150 years ago. I got a copy. I got a first edition of it back here somewhere.
I was going to ask you about him. I was going to ask you about him.
About Graham?
Yeah. I saw the show. It seemed like they were trying to say giants were doing a lot of stuff, weren't they?
Graham.
I like it all, but
yeah. So I folled Graham.
I think giants are part of it for sure. Absolutely.
I got Fingerprints of the Gods when it came out in 1995.
I have it. Yeah.
Got it when it first came out, and at the time I was in school, but I dropped out and was working, and I'm reading this book, and I'd always been interested in this stuff. I read Von Daniken years before and all of that. Fingerprints was just absolutely riveting. It sucked me in like nothing else, right? Talking about
New
this
York Times
lost
bestseller.
civilization. He never uses the A word in Fingerprints, right? He never mentions Atlantis, right? But you knew that's what he's talking about, right? But at the same time, he's basically taking the von Daniken idea, right? Of there's where the evidence for the civilization is what looks like advanced technology that we can see in artifacts in the past, right? But he didn't want to call it aliens, right? So he's going with Atlantis like civilization instead. But he's even referencing it in the title, Fingerprints of the Gods, right? That's a subtle reference to Chariots of the Gods.
Yeah.
So he's playing with that idea, and and uses a lot of the same things. He relied on the work of a lot of the work of a guy named Charles Hapgood, who was somebody who was pitching both the idea of a pole shift cataclysm was a big idea of his. And that's some of his.
That's actual
Here too,
fact, because I have studied
right?
geography and geology, and there are telltale marks on the ocean floor of when the poles have shifted direction. Because they can see the alignment of the metallic ores, the magnetic
Right.
metallic ores on the bottom of the ocean change orientation each time the poles flip. So
Right.
that's actual fact. So it
Right.
does happen. It will happen again.
Well, but those are magnetic pole shifts, right? Where the
Yeah.
magnetic poles flipped, right? And that's what changes the orientations of the rocks. What Hapgood was talking about was Earth crust displacement, where the idea is the Earth crust itself slides around the globe like the loose skin of an
along
arm.
the inner mantle, right? The mechanics of the pole shift, we don't know if it's a sharp, sudden, violent thing, or if it's a gradual, or if it's a sudden, violent thing. Okay, yeah, or right. It's going to be an extension level event. Certain creatures are going to not survive it. Certain areas are going to change. The maps are going to change. Bodies of water are going to change, and livelihoods are going to change. But we don't know for sure. We've never been through one, so we don't know.
Part of the problem when Hapgood came out with this idea, in the 50s, it was a lot of the evidence he was using was showing that there were temperate fossils and things in Antarctica and things like that, right? The problem is he wrote this right before plate tectonics became an accepted mechanism to explain a lot of the same things, right? So he didn't have all of the data that we were about to literally have a couple of years later, right? The idea of continental drift had been around for a long time. Wegener came up with it in the early 1900s, but nobody really accepted it because there was no good mechanism to explain it. And so that's part of the problem with Hapgood's crustal displacement theory is a lot of the evidence that he was using to make those arguments would be explained just a couple of years later by plate tectonics,
he didn't have the mechanics down. He didn't know about subduction and abduction zones, so he didn't know how it worked, but he knew it was there.
And so Graham picks up on this, right? And looking at the idea of, hey, maybe there have been pole shifts in the past. Maybe this great cataclysm is what happened to this supposed lost civilization. And so for a long time,
the flood story. It could be why the flood story is. Some people think the flood story is God threw a rock at Earth, and this big rock hit the Pacific Ocean and flooded all the coastal zones. That wouldn't account for deep inland flood stories.
And they have them in
Brazil.
What Graham was going with, right?
Yeah, he's particularly good with talking about Lake Titicaca and that giant. It's like the highest freshwater lake in the planet, and most of the buildings that are there, those big H blocks in these buildings from ancient times, they think were knocked over by some kind of cataclysm, and they think it was a flood because there's a lot of sea-going fossils up on that ridge, which should not be there.
Right. Well. Yes and no. There's ways now that we have other ways to explain it other than pole shifts now, though, right?
Yeah.
And but Graham was working with that. Eventually, he abandoned that, by the late 90s, and started looking for another mechanism. And of course, today, he is going with the idea of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, which is the idea that either a comet or an asteroid impacted
a series of large
or it broke up, right? Here's the fun thing, right? I was talking about Ignatius Donnelly and his Atlantis book that came out in 1882. He wrote a sequel in 1883 called Ragnarok, in which he proposed a comet or a meteor is actually what caused the destruction of Atlantis, right? So even this impact hypothesis goes back to Donnelly in the 1880s. It's been around for a long time. This is it's still kind of a controversial theory in archaeology. It hasn't been really, there's problems with it. And, I've actually recently excavated a site in Florida that where that horizon should be, even potentially a pre-Clovis site where we get some very early dates. The part of the problem with the impact hypothesis, and we did testing for it. We've taken samples, and we're gonna look to see if there are any of the some of those telltale markers of an impact, but we don't really see the same kind of things here in Florida that you do in other parts of the North America, where it looks like there may be something going on. And that's one of the problems with the impact hypothesis is we should see it everywhere. There's no doubt that there was some a climactic event. The Younger Dryas is this kind of weird, somewhat unexplained like mini ice age, right when the greater ice age was ending, things were starting to warm up. All of a sudden, for 1,000 years, things freeze up again, and it gets cold, and then and so there is something weird going on there, and people have been trying to come up with hypotheses to explain it, for really over a century now since it was discovered, and none of them have been entirely satisfactory. The impact hypothesis is just one of several. Volcanism, like extreme volcanism, could explain some of the same things too. But then you got to ask, okay, what's causing extreme volcanism then, right? So there are some weird things going on. Some of the problems, the extinctions that we see of the megafauna, they don't occur all that rapidly. They actually occur, over, a long period of centuries. So weird things.
I think there are only globally 5 or 6 huge like global wide extinction level events, and there are several smaller ones that are continent wide or
Right.
smaller area wide, but
they don't take place
for the whole planet.
But they don't take place at the same time all over like you might expect with some kind of major impact event, right?
Yeah.
And so yeah, there's some weird stuff going on there, but the impact hypothesis by itself doesn't, I don't know. It's weird. I mean, the jury's still out, truthfully, is what it is. I mean, it really is. We're all, people are still working on this. And, it's Graham, though, latched onto it, not because the evidence is there, but because it's something that fit his already preconceived hypothesis. And that's one of the problems I have with Graham's work. And he even admitted this in 2002. That's where he really lost me, right? I was so inspired to get back to kind of the story. Like after reading Fingerprints, I got into it. I read all of his sources. I read Hapgood. I read Hamlet's Mill. I went through all of his sources. I started to realize that he was kind of cherry picking stuff a little bit. I started to realize this, but I was intrigued enough that I decided, you know what? I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, and I'm going to go back to school, and I'm going to become an archaeologist. And I did. I started to learn over time. There were problems with his methodology, as I started to learn the real stuff, and I started to, get out there and dig the holes yourself. It's a different story. And really, where Graham lost me, even as I started to disagree with him, I still thought, you know what, though, he's still challenging things and making us think, and that's good. Even if he's wrong, it's good to question, right? Always, and keep challenging ideas so you don't become set in your ways and just accept things. But in 2002, it really started around 2000, where with the Yonaguni Monument. Are you familiar with the monument off the coast of Japan?
Step pyramid type structure off of Japan, one of Japan's lower islands.
Right, which Graham very much wanted to be man-made, right? But they went there. He even brought Robert Schoch, who's best known, as the guy that
I know Robert.
The hypothesis on the Sphinx being older, and even Robert Schoch dived in and was like, "No, man, this is natural." I mean, yeah, it's fragmenting regularly, but rock does that. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the cliffs of Dover, it's like hexagonal pieces of rock.
Nature does regular
straight
things.
Line. It's in a hexagonal pattern. It's nature. So.
And yet, Graham refused to accept even Robert Schoch telling him, like, no, man, this isn't, like, we're friends and colleagues. I'm telling you, look, I'm the 10,000-year-old Sphinx guy, and I'm telling you, this is man-made. This is not, remnants of Lemuria here in the Pacific.
It sounds like Graham's having a little bit of Dr. Zahi Hawass-ism.
Well, it is, right? I mean, you see it on both sides, right? You see it, because at the end of the day, it's about egos, unfortunately. Egos come into play. And for Graham, it started to be more about
Zahi
showing...
Hawass's nickname is the ego.
Yeah. But Graham's got the same problem. And you saw this in the conflict between the two in the 90s, big time. And also John Anthony West, who... I actually, while I disagreed on him a lot of stuff, I used to correspond with him, and I loved him.
Yeah, he's passed away since, though.
And he passed away a few years ago, and and he was incredibly gracious. We corresponded, some in the 90s, as I was just getting into grad school. But Graham, he disagreed with John on that too, and they had kind of a little falling out for a while. They patched it up, but because Graham continued to run with it and publish it, even though he was being told, like, by not by mainstream folks, but by people like Robert Schoch, that this wasn't legit. It became more about his ego and not being wrong than about trying to get to the truth. And it really came to a head in 2002 when he posted this sort of manifesto on his website. It's actually still up today. You can find it by Googling it, where he made the case that he saw his role as something like an attorney, right, or an advocate, because he uses the British term, and that he's defending a client, and his client is this lost civilization that he knows is there. And so it's not his role to acknowledge any evidence that's contradictory to his client, this lost civilization. And because he was getting challenged on a couple of things, right? And basically what he was doing was admitting that he's cherry-picking evidence to support his preconceived idea rather than letting the evidence lead where it's supposed to go. And that's where he really lost me. And I'm like, man, you can't do that. That's, that is intellectually dishonest. It's okay to be wrong. We're always wrong. Archaeologists are wrong. Historians are wrong. We're always wrong. It's okay to be wrong. It's not okay to be intellectually dishonest, because we're never gonna understand any of these things if we do that. And that's where he lost me. That's where I became very disappointed in him. And he lost a lot of followers at that point. He kind of disappeared for a little while. That's when he went down the ayahuasca route there in the early 2000s, before he kind of resurrected his career a decade later, by showing up on Rogan. Unfortunately, you see that with a lot of his new stuff too, right? He's still, it's unfortunate because I think he really meant well, and I think he was genuine in the 90s when he was really still exploring this stuff. And he got treated unfairly by the archaeological community to some degree. He really did. And now he's just bitter. And it comes across, and you talking about his new show, he just comes across as bitter and angry, and he misrepresents the archaeological community a lot. That's why you're getting a lot of archaeologists are now angry and bitter and are being shitty to him. And now it's just back and forth. Everybody's just being, really,
everything's just,
really mean to each other and toxic to each other. And it's not good. Right.
Yeah. It's a cutthroat. It's a cutthroat, I guess, research division, you want to call it. I mean, I've seen plenty of things on Dr. Zahi Hawass, and I think he's an absolute ass. And I think he's well named. The last 3 letters of his name.
He is not popular among archaeologists. Let me tell you.
Yeah, he's the same. He's a green archaeologist, but he's in the same shoe as Graham Hancock. Nobody likes him. But he was in control of some of the best data we've ever been able to get on the pyramids. But he refuses to hear the correct, logic on it. And I everything he has said about the pyramids, I think he's absolutely 100% wrong.
Yeah, it's complex. We could do whole episodes on this stuff.
We got about 7 minutes left.
We don't have enough time to talk about pyramids.
I
can talk pyramids.
We'll have to do
I can talk pyramids. Believe me.
We can do that. I can do a whole thing just on the Sphinx and the Hall of Record. That's a fun.
We'll have to do a trilogy, a part 3.
Yeah, we'll just do that part 3 next week.
We'll get you on here when you're 80 for Indiana part 5.
Right.
Shanks part 5. I got to ask you, have you read the Conan comic yet? I ordered it, but I haven't got it yet. The newest one.
I'm a consultant on the Conan comic. I write the essays in the back of it.
Nice.
Got,
cool.
Do I have one around here?
Conan the Barbarian by Titan Comics.
Yep.
I got one. It started to get hard to find. I finally found one on eBay. I got one coming, but he hasn't sent it yet. He better send it. That's all I know.
Well, check out the essay in the back because it's by yours truly. I'm basically doing like Stan's soapbox in the back, but Hyborian Age version.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's fun. So I work with those guys. I work as a consultant for Heroic Signatures, who are the rights owners to all the Robert E. Howard properties, including Conan.
It just came from Marvel, and now they got it, right?
Yeah, Marvel had it for a while. Marvel had the license back for a while, and Heroic Signatures took it back, and they're publishing it themselves through Titan Comics. Titan Books is a British company that does a lot of great work, and so I've been working with them. They're doing publishing some stuff. They got a lot of projects out there. Let me think about what I'm allowed to talk about. There's going to be a few things announced this weekend at Comic-Con. Actually, I wish I was out there at San Diego, but they're going to have a panel this weekend. They're going to be announcing some stuff. There are definitely some cool things in the works that my NDA prevents me from talking about. I wish I could, but there's going to be some cool stuff coming. With the Robert E. Howard properties, including Conan, in various media. But yeah, the comic looks good, man. It's cool. It's old school. Feels like old school Savage Sword. It's the writer Jim Zub is he's a real fan. He gets it. The editor Matt Murray's a good guy. He's one of us. He's a true fan.
I've heard Jim Zug's name before. He's done other stuff, hasn't he? He's been like
He's been around, and he wrote
it's like ZUGG, right?
Zub, ZUB, yeah. He's been writer for Marvel and some of the other big names for a long time. He's been around for a while. The artist right now is from Spain. His name's Rob De La Torre, and he looks like he's channeling Buscema and Frazetta, mixed with that European 70s European vibe too, right? He's doing traditional inks, which a lot of folks don't do anymore. A lot of people just do pencils and they ink stuff digitally. Comic inking is becoming a lost art, and he does old school inks. In fact, I really want to pick up an original page. So it's cool. It's
check it out for sure.
Very much a throwback, to old school Savage Sword. Even more
definitely. My thing with Marvel, I tried to keep up with those. There's just so many. It's like Conan doing this, Conan. It's like, man, y'all gonna have to. That's the thing with comics. There's too many things coming out to a point to where you're like, oh my god, this is like cocaine. I had to slow down.
Yeah.
It's like that. When I was collecting comics in the 90s in college, God, I was collecting the X books. There's like 6 or 7 X-Men books. I collected all the Spider-Man books. There's like 4 or 5 Spider-Man books. I did all the Batman books. There's 5 or 6 of those going on. Superman. There's like 4 or 5 of those. It was mind-boggling. I'd go every Wednesday when the new prints came out, and I'd walk out with a stack, thicker than 2 Bibles.
Now I have like 13 big long boxes, and my mom's like, you got to find somewhere else to put these because there's one with her right now and crap. But some interesting ones that I'm getting is that Fire and Ice prequel one that's coming out.
Right,
that's going to be really good. There's a James Tynion Dracula coming out. They just announced in October where James Tynion doing it. But one of the ones I'm checking out that y'all might want to check out, Void Rivals. Have you heard of that by Robert Kirkman? No. Check this out. They're working with Hasbro. It's called Void Rivals. It's a new one that just started. I would try to get one as soon as you can, number one, because they're already doing like a 3rd print on it, but you can find it. But check this out. Transformers, G.I. Joe, Void Rivals, all in this same universe. And a Transformer shows up in this comic, and then somehow Joshua Williamson is doing a Cobra Commander and Duke, and they're all like in the same universe. It's weird, but it's like really well done. Like I'm hoping it's going to be successful, but they're doing a new Transformers, and it all ties into this Void Rivals comic that just came out by the guy that did Walking Dead, Kirkman.
Kirkman's great. Yeah.
So G.I. Joe and the Autobots are going to team up against Cobra and the Decepticons.
That's crazy. I mean,
Okay.
you know what?
Yeah.
All those Transform movies to me suck. So if this spawns some real movies, I would really be glad.
You know, Bumblebee was kind of redeeming, though. It was closer to the 80s G1 stuff. I mean,
I gave up
good.
on them. Like, I gave up on those Michael Bay.
I couldn't get into them. I think I saw the first couple.
Bumblebee isn't Michael Bay. He produces it, but
I think I
not
saw
directing.
Bumblebee, but I just didn't do it for me. But I'm
Yeah.
hoping
Come on, that opening sequence when they're on Cybertron, that's all 100% G1. That was awesome.
I like the old cartoon,
I'm with you, man.
the movie cartoon.
That's what I'm referring to with G1. That's the original cartoon, the original Generation 1 box and cartoon.
Well, Jeffrey, you got a site? How can people get a hold of you, keep up with your
You know,
stuff?
I don't have a site at the moment. I'm going to be working on building a site called Archeo Obscura. So it's not quite ready yet, but it's going to be a blog, and I'm
sounds nice.
Yeah, talking about starting a podcast where I'm going to be exploring alternative archaeology, paranormal, UFOs, a lot of the weird stuff that we're talking about here today. We're going to go in a number of directions. I got a colleague of mine also into this stuff, another archaeologist. She and I are going to probably be doing a podcast, and hope to be having some guests. Maybe we'll have you on as a guest on our show.
Let us know. Let us know. All right. Thanks so much, and we appreciate it. Jeffrey Shanks, everybody, and Jamie Nicholas. I got to play these
Thanks,
jingle
guys.
jams.
It was a blast.
Everybody have a good weekend. Take care. Thanks so much.
You're listening to UPRN, United Public Radio Network, coming to you live on 105.3 right up to 107.7 FM from the beautiful city of New Orleans. UPRNTalkRadio.com.
Well, that was fun.
Got one more. I'm trying to do it.
Looking for stories that are fresh and new? Dark fantasy, humor, space exploration, time travel, cyberpunk, alternate history, and more. They're in the L. Ron Hubbard Presents Writers of the Future anthology from 24 award-winning authors and illustrators, plus art and writing tips and bonus stories. L. Ron Hubbard Presents Writers of the Future. Buy your copy at galaxypress.com, Amazon, or wherever books are sold.
It's time for you to get out and nominate your favorite podcasts. There's an amazing show I want you to consider for the People's Choice Podcast Awards. Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast. In 3 categories: education, storyteller drama, and art. For 4 years, the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast has provided advice and tips from international best-selling authors, world-class artists, contest judges and winners, and industry professionals based on the world-famous Writers of the Future contest created in 1983 by L. Ron Hubbard to help the aspiring writer and artist no matter their age. It is dedicated to the future of storytelling and art by showing that it is never too late to start, and those who make it are those who never give up. Go to podcastawards.com to nominate the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast in any or all of the 3 categories: education, storyteller drama, and art. That's podcastawards.com, and please take a moment and go out and vote now.